My name is Joanna Lane, and I am with the NFCA, and we're thrilled to have these amazing 4 panelists with us. If you are expecting Kelly Inouye, you are not seeing things. We have Coach Tar, and if you have somebody at Coach Tar's caliber that you can bring in from the bullpen, then you're in great shape. So thank you, Coach, for saying yes on very short notice. We appreciate you today. And then we also have Shannon Hayes from Grand Canyon and Jessica Leger, who's from Louisiana. Did I get it right? Close? I was close. All right. Thanks for humoring me. I'm close. And then Samantha Ekstrand with us, the NFCA legal counsel. So what we're going to do first, while we gather these questions, is we are going to let them go around and just tell you one thing that they love to do or see or have seen in an end of year scenario. So it might be a question they love to ask in a meeting. It might be something they put into use that they really enjoy doing with their team or they've seen a coach do. This webinar specifically, we make Samantha go first and answer everything that's hard. So Samantha, you're going to be our leadoff hitter. What's something you hope every coach does at the end of the year?
I'm not used to being the leadoff, Joanna, but yes, I think I think that you get to this point of the year and it feels like the proverbial finish line. You have been going strong since August or September and everyone is tired. I think it is important, no matter what your season was like, how you're ending, that you see the good. And so the question that I would hope that everybody asks in an end of year meeting, whether it's with your players or your staff, is what was the best part, right? What was the best part? What was the highlight? What was your favorite moment? So that we are leading not just with criticism and scrutiny or what went wrong or what you lost, but really, trying to frame and focus on what was, after this big long journey of preseason and training and a long season of 56 games or whatever the number is, that you get to this and say, what was good? What was good? Because I do think that that's lost often.
Excellent work, leadoff hitter. Excellent work. Coach Hayes, how about you go next?
Well, that's a great point. We always start with, what did you get out of this year the most? I mean, what was the number one thing that you took from this year? And if it seems like in these exit meetings, if you start with the positive, it's hard for it to go negative. And so Samantha made a great point, and then also just going over how much progress that they had made. We do exit meetings for Christmas as well after the first semester, and trying to look at the progress, going back on the notes from the year before, if they're not freshmen, and trying to see what they've accomplished and focus on those positives.
Thank you, Coach. Coach Tar.
Hey guys, I think one of the things beyond the 2 listed already is evaluating yourself via our core values. That would be probably my favorite thing to do, is just using our core values, one, to just see if there's identification about what they are and how they might resonate with each individual.
Thank you very much. And from an administrative standpoint, Jessica, give us your take.
Yeah, so batting cleanup here. I think as an administrator, my big thing is culture. And so, I really want to make sure that, we do exit surveys at the end of the year to get a good idea of any trends that we're seeing in the program. So I try to update our coach prior to those exit interviews with the individual student athletes with just trends that they need to be aware of. So I think, I'm curious at looking at the perspective of the student athlete in terms of, who on your team, makes the biggest impact for you as a leader, and really talking about, those difference makers and just hearing those, taking, I guess, the perspective off of the individual student athlete for a little bit and then making it about the team and trying to get that perspective as the coach in terms of, who are those on the team that really make a difference and how can we dig into those and help them become better leaders.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. Probably for the sake of just clarity. I would say for this call, as we go through the next few questions, when we say an exit meeting, I think that would be a meeting that would be held in person between the coaches, student athlete, and administrator. If it's an exit survey or an interview, that would be more of a written document that's maybe sent from administration or a third party entity. So I know we'll get into both of those. They are a little different. So just as we try to clarify some of those, one question, Samantha, is do you offer exit meetings to everyone, and do you have exit meetings? So maybe we start there. What's the goal of them, the purpose? Should everyone have them? More of a big picture view.
So I think we have seen exit meetings in terms of, the team meetings with every player who's returning, go through a variety of phases. They've been required. I've seen coaches require them. I've seen coaches not have them and not be interested in them, to sign up if you want. I think I would encourage you to really think about the meetings you've had through the year, and does it make sense? Does it make sense with the timing of, school ending and exams and summer break starting, to have a check-in? What does that look like? I'm a big fan of time and perspective. And so I think that the day after you roll in from your last away trip that you lost is probably not, an ideal time to cram in some meetings just to check the box and have them. So I would encourage you as coaches, to really think about where you are with your team, what you've had, the timing that you have. But it does feel fitting to have, some closure and reflection on a year in a season. We all kind of prefer to have it in person, but with spring sports, it's frankly tough sometimes because your academic calendars just don't set you up well to have that time. But I would say, yes, having some contact or interaction, with players would be advisable, but I don't think you need to require it.
Thank you very much. Coach Hayes, let's have you do this one too. Do you meet with everyone, even those graduating? Is it optional, mandatory? How do you approach them?
We meet with everyone besides the graduates. We'll go have dinner later that week if they're around, or they'll come back in the summer and try to get back with the grads and make it something special. But we require exit meetings with everybody, and again, we do it before Christmas. We have such a long Christmas break, almost a month, and so we try to address goals and what we want done, what we want to see, what we're moving forward until we get back in January, and then doing the same for the summer. So but exit meetings for us are very important.
Thank you. Jessica, from an administrative standpoint, how does your department do that? Do you meet with individuals, or is it a written survey? And what you talked about the trends, but what maybe are the more end goals or the information you hope to gather?
Yeah, so we conduct a written survey with all of our student athletes on each team near the end of the season. We try to do it before postseason takes place so that we can, get a perspective that's more genuine and, not deal with anyone who might be upset with the outcome of the season. But we used to do seniors only, and then we found that it was much more valuable to include freshmen through seniors in that survey. And again, when I say looking for trends, I'm not looking for one-off extreme statements, but I'm looking for, consistent patterns in areas that we're doing well and areas that we can improve. And then I encourage our head coach to dig into those themes as they meet individually with each student athlete. And I do encourage our head coach to meet with the student athletes at the end of the season. I get that it is all about timing and it's got to be right. But some form of contact I think is important. I think you do have to be strategic in that timing. I do think that waiting until the end of the season to start meeting with everyone is too late. I think that, in a perfect world right now, you probably have already had some preliminary meetings with those players who you hope to return to your program, and that you're showing them that you value them and that you care, and just what they mean to you and to your program, that you're re-recruiting them in this day and age with the transfer portal. Hopefully that's already taken place. But then after a postseason, I think every coach is different. Some like it to be very short, some like it to be more long-winded and more personal, but I think having that point of contact at the end of the season is very important. And then it gives the coach that perspective on where that student really stands and how we can better meet them, and then how we can make the program better as a whole moving forward.
Thank you. Coach Tar, for you, do the meetings look the same? Are they different? Do you ask similar questions? What's that look like?
I think the best ones that we've ever done have looked similar, but like a pretty loose format. So like I said earlier, just using our value system to maybe just like self-evaluate, and then kind of like also future casting leadership questions, whatever those might be. And then something I've considered recently, I'm pretty good friends with Coach DeBoer, our former football coach, but he showed me some of the systems that they've used. I still haven't like quite exercised them, but almost even a questionnaire from your student athlete population, more so year round, but like using it to get feedback on the assistant coaches that the athletes are learning from. So I kind of like thinking about that idea just as constructive feedback for your system and the coaches and their even effectiveness. So that's kind of something new I'm going to try to endeavor. But I think just my style isn't very rigid. And so for me to have something consistent and something that at least I'm asking everybody. And I've also thought too, especially this year, because I'm not sure, how long our season will go. Oftentimes I guess I've been lucky enough to have, the conflict of going deep into postseason, and even at the World Series, and our quarter is ending at the exact same time as our season. And so you just like lose your people so fast, so you can't really even get good feedback. But just trying to maybe even think about this week, even trying to go through some, somewhat formalized, but just informal conversations, kind of like Coach Hayes would do, maybe even before Christmas time. But we often meet and kind of use the similar format about values and that whole piece. And then we also do our team awards conversations almost through our values system, and use just kind of use reference points of, who would win this award based on our, selfless award and our toughness award, those kind of things, and just get kind of like conversation feedback from each athlete.
Good info. Shannon, for you, what questions do you like to ask? Are there things that you've started avoiding that maybe you used to ask and now you're like, nope, not going there? How's that work in your program?
Well, kind of like what Heather said, ours are very casual, and each student athlete is different. They're all in different situations. They might have had different roles. I think you have to be careful with certain questions that you may not ask, like, how did you feel about your role this year when they're not playing? I mean, just common sense stuff. But, the things we cover are real simple. Your role for next year, how we see you fitting in for next year, and the expectations in the off season, the things you need to improve on, to reach the goals that they want personally for them. And then, of course, when you ask certain questions on how do you feel the year went, that's a question I ask a lot, because I want to see what they're feeling, especially if you have a student athlete that has, you think might be transferring because they're not getting a lot of playing time, or they don't see a future as far as playing time in our program. You want to see where they're at. And if in this day and age, with the portal, you've got to ask a lot of questions, and especially with the new legislation coming down the pipeline, with roster limits, we're not sure what we're going to be with our roster limits, or different scholarship situations from school to school. You've got to stay pretty fluid, and so communication at the end of the season is very important, and trying to have a crystal ball, I guess you would say, to see where things are going to be with your roster for the next year.
I can see the thought bubbles over Samantha's head right now. I can see them. So Samantha, in regards to, let's start with this one, in regards to the legislation, and then Jessica, I'll come to you next, but how are you trying to prepare coaches and help them? They know nothing. No one does. So navigate the void, so to speak.
The last time we gathered, in December at the convention, everybody, circled April 7th on their calendar, and then we were going to have some answers. And we don't have them yet. And I think they're coming in terms of what that proposed settlement is looking like. But, roster limits were proposed. Judge Wilkins said, I don't really like them. She listened to over 100 athletes who said they were going to lose their opportunity. That resonated loudly with her. She tried to steer or suggest to the power players in college athletics and on the other side that they needed to deal with the roster limits. They did not. And so she did not approve the proposed order yet and a proposed settlement. And so roster limits are a sticking point in this case. And we, read a lot of reassurances now from the NCAA and the Power 5 leaders that that's not going to hang up the settlement. What does that mean? I think we were all preparing to trim our rosters, and some coaches already did. And Judge Wilkins is saying, those athletes deserve a chance, that this settlement needs to be fair and equitable for all members of the class. And having roster limits is leaving out a chunk. So I suspect that we will see a proposed settlement that phases them in. I think some athletes could be grandfathered. And if you have cut people, I think there's even the chance that those players might get a chance to return. And I think that is messy and hard to understand. But legally, the judge is not going to approve it as is. And so still TBD, because I do think that we'll have an answer on this case within, I would bet, by the end of May, beginning of June, because I think they're scrambling to try to fix the point that she kept, warning them about that was going to hang this up. So, what that means for you is I think you have to be in good communication with your athletic administration and following their directives and checking in with them before you're making, roster management decisions.
Jessica, how about with you from an administrator standpoint? You have a lot of coaches in different sports dealing with the same thing. How are you trying to educate them through the end of year process and uncertainty?
I mean, we took a very proactive approach, and I mean, we've been talking about this for the past year and trying to manage our recruiting process and our rosters to fit within those roster limits. We do have, a few teams that may be oversigned at the moment, and we're working through those issues, and doing the best that we can to try to navigate that. For us, from an administrative perspective, it's, especially as a mid-major school, for us, it's really been about scrubbing the budget, and finding as much money as we can, to try to increase our scholarship numbers, especially for softball. Coming from 12 scholarships, where can we pull from to gradually create a plan to increase those to get as close to 25 as possible. And that, that's been probably the greatest challenge. And then right behind that, comes, our rev share number and how much can we raise for NIL? And that's, I think you have to be mindful of those three buckets and really, be working towards those, and I think that's, it's so easy to get caught up as a coach in the NIL for 1 year. But how do we replenish that bucket, which is now going to become rev share and is coming from the university, and how can we make it, how can we sustain it? And so that is, that's the challenge that we're facing. And I think, we as administrators are starting to look at sports a little bit differently. And, we're trying to help those teams that have been more successful at our universities at least continue to be as successful as they have been in this new climate. And that's the, the challenge that we're facing. And that's what we're focused on, is how can we continue to give them the resources to be successful, to try to be able to fund, this new 25 number as opposed to 12.
Thank you. Appreciate that. And then Samantha, to go back to Coach Hayes and his answer about the questions that you ask, what are some questions that you would encourage coaches to ask? And what are some questions that you would encourage coaches maybe to think about how they ask, or what information they're truly after, and if there's a better way to gain that information?
From their athletic administration?
Sorry, no, from student athletes for
athletes.
For the meetings at the end of the year. Yeah.
Oh, we're back in the meetings. Good. All right, let's get off of the house. It's such a sticky topic, huh? So, I think that consistency through the year is important. I would expect that most of you have been having meetings from the very beginning, from, August and preseason, at some point checking in the fall, at the end of, before, around the holidays, coming back. And so to me, it's a conversation that continues through the year, and that this is an endpoint to this season, whether it's year 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5, or maybe 6 for your athletes. For some, it might be the end of their career. And I think at that point there is, a different kind of reflection. But if you're talking about athletes who are coming back, their development, spans the year and then spans each year in their career. So, talking about, their goals, what worked well, what was challenging for them, I think at the end, asking what do they need from you as a coach? I think that that's an important question, as well as, what else, is there anything else that you think is important for me to know? And then, looking forward, how does the summer look? I think, having a sense of where they are going to be in their summer, in their training. I do think at some point, giving them some feedback on areas that you would like them to be focusing on or working on is important. Sometimes, though, having everything in one meeting might not be a good idea. You might want to have some closure and have more of a listening meeting, and then shift at some point into, you giving them feedback, as to things that they should be, focusing on to get better. The ones that I think are the toughest meetings are the kids, and I think Shannon had referenced it, who haven't played, who have had a disappointing year, who are disgruntled. I think that it is, I think having those hard conversations is important. And I think how you lead those players through those conversations can make a very big difference in their development, as well as, your relationship and your ability to lead your program. I think if you're only talking to or looking forward to talking to the kids who are really happy or playing well or playing big roles, then you're probably missing a good chunk of your program. And what I don't want to have happen is those disgruntled kids to feel like you are not listening to them, and that you're not, and that doesn't mean you're always going to be saying things that they want to hear. But I think having that setting where you're asking those questions at the end of the year and listening to them, and that sometimes those meetings lead to, like, is this the best match for you? If you are not happy here, if you don't feel like you're getting as much, out of this experience as you want, then let's talk about what that looks like. So some of these meetings can be tough, and I wouldn't shy away from them, because I think when you do, then they go elsewhere, and then it ends up, coming back to you, but not directly.
Let's talk a little bit about transfer portal and the meetings and those things. Shannon, you had talked about having the conversation on maybe where you fit a year from now, or where you see that with a student athlete in the role. Do you think that conversation has bearing on transfer portal decisions? Do you find that most of the time the kid has already made up their mind, or sometimes you have no idea until you get their name from someone else? I'm sure it's a variety of things, but do you think about that in your conversations, and what impact might those have on portal decisions for you?
Well, absolutely, I do. You'll learn a lot of things from just communicating back and forth, and them asking you questions on what you see their role is for the next year. I've had several kids over the past couple of years that, of course, made their decision to enter the portal, just knowing who they were going to compete against and how I saw them, matching up against that competition at particular positions. But, in an ideal circumstance, you hope going into each meeting, um, basically how things are going to be with each student athlete, and there aren't any surprises. And especially when you have, really good assistants that do a good job communicating behind the scenes, and keeping their ear to the ground, and talking to your student athletes on a daily basis, you hope to not get too many surprises. But for sure, exit meetings, that's one of the big things that, the important roles that they play are helping, those student athletes decide, well, maybe this isn't the best place for me, and I want to go somewhere and play all the time. And with the transfer portal and how it is now, obviously we see that happen more and more.
Coach Tar, your thoughts on the correlation maybe between these meetings and portal, or anything that you try to do to understand where student athletes are?
Well, I think one of the biggest keys is your full staff, like being on the same page and just having great communication up, down, in, out, because most of the time all of that has happened before it's happened, whether it be people, you as a head coach not knowing how people are really feeling is ultimately hinges on your ability to communicate amongst your coaches and players and all that. So when there's breakdowns, there's breakdowns. So we had, kind of a big breakdown last year where 3 of our seniors came to me at the same time and told me they each, for their own reasons, wanted to leave. And it was the most like distant conversation I'd ever had with those 3 women, but that had been forming through like probably months, without me quite knowing. And that can happen like so fast. So I think just in general, like staying in tune, staying in touch. But of course, if there's a breakdown on your staff, then you're probably going to be the last to know what's going on. So yeah, that's probably my only thoughts there. It's a very fluid piece and so many different things. Like every year it feels like you can get ahead of it better, but not until maybe, not that you're dropping the ball every year, but there's just more forward conversations that you can have that maybe the year before you weren't really aware to have, or you weren't really knowing to know. So I think I've personally learned a lot through the past couple years on maybe how to position stuff, but I just think it's, the more transparent you can make the conversations as you move forward, that you're not going to take it personally. If someone ultimately wants to leave, you just want to know, because it kind of is becoming a business so that you can move pieces around. But now this year is different than last year because you don't even quite know if the House settlement will pass, and the timing of that could get sticky for us because, the May 18th portal date and whenever it closes, all that stuff. I don't know. If anybody here has any advice on that, I say yes to you today, Joanna, as you needed someone, because I actually wanted to be on this and I kind of forgot that it was a thing. So I was like, yeah, I want to listen and see if I can learn anything. So I'm kind of in a dual role right now. I'm all ears.
I love it. Well, that's what we're all here for, right? And I think that, some of the hard things are just being able to move forward and understand that it's been such a business side recently, and it's so different than maybe when you were, a first year coach or in the first year of a program. And I'm going to ask you to rewind your memories, both of you, because one of the questions we have is, the first year in a new program, what do I ask? What do I learn? What do I need to know? So maybe Jessica, if you want to go first, you have a first year head coach of your university. What would you encourage her to do with, her first round of exit meetings? And then we'll come to the rest of you.
Yeah, we've had this conversation, and one of her strengths is culture, and it's being personable and building those relationships. And so I think she's done a great job, like I said, of doing that all year. I think, again, it can't come down to the end of the season, and that's where we want to be. And I think that's our goal with all of our head coaches, is that we want to create a culture that the student athletes don't want to leave, no matter what. We understand that that's going to involve some level of money, based on their skill level. But beyond that, we want to create a space where they feel valued for who they are, and where they know that that they make a difference and that they don't want to leave. We've seen that in one of our recent new hires of our men's basketball coach, and he's come in and off of the championship game and at with the Final Four, and he came in and has already been recruiting elite athletes, and that's what he prides himself on. And so I've had that conversation with our softball coach, that this is what we need to do. We need to, create a culture and a program where people want to be here. And I think anybody that's been around our team and our program, they just see this this sense of unity this year, and this sense of, even though we may not be winning at the same level that we were previously, there's just a sincere team bond, a sense of unity, people playing for each other and wanting to be here. And I think when you create that over time, these transfer portal issues will take care of themselves, because that's, to me, is the ultimate goal as an administrator. We've got to create a place that our student athletes believe is bigger than themselves and that they want to be a part of. And so that's ultimately our goal.
Thank you. Shannon, for you, going back to, most recently your first year at Grand Canyon, what were some of the things that you were thinking about at the end of the year? And are those meetings different now than they were then? Or would you encourage a first year coach to have different meetings than you do now?
They're definitely different now, because most first year college coaches going in, and a lot of it depends on how your administration that hires you wants you to handle your roster. Coming into Grand Canyon, I turned down the job coming in. I was happy where I was at, um, because I didn't want to inherit a roster of a program that hadn't been winning games. And so then they called me back and said, "Hey, we'll let you take the head coach's exception, where everyone on the roster that you do not want to retain gets to keep their scholarship till they graduate." And so I kept a lot of kids the first year on the roster, just to give them a chance as well to play. And so that first year was a little harder when you want to bring in your own kids and your own talent and try to win with your own roster and build your own culture. And um, it's much different now that we've kind of established our rosters and we don't have the turnover that we had that first year.
And Coach Tar, how about you with your first year? You've been there a while, so I'm going to challenge you right now, but or just advice you would give when, those first year coaches call you right now, just trying to figure out how to live life and what should they do?
Oh man. Well, I'm probably not the best one to answer this one because I had no idea what I was doing at 29, but I do know that I was able to get as much support as I wanted from our administration. So, I mean, there were times even my first year where I had dads coming to me and saying that we need to have team captains and certain things like that, but I knew how to get ahead of those meetings that, were being wished for, and having the administration be involved in some of those meetings where, whether it be in red shirt conversations or injuries, I would just always bring my administration into it. And, as needed, I feel like I would still do that today, in terms of just, being a united front on all situations. So I guess that's the thing that comes to mind the most. I can't remember, the papers, the questions, but I do remember one time, this is kind of a weird thing, but I don't know how I got a hold of this, but I remember it was in 2000, maybe 6. I had a packet and it was an exit interview piece it was something Sue Enquist used for her exit meetings. And it was like 4 pages, and the athletes, it looked like, just kind of like a general survey of things, some really cool questions. I still think I have it today. And at the time I remember, maybe it was my 3rd year, I used that and I copied a lot of the words and the things. And it was kind of the same things that we had already just talked about. But I remember just kind of like trying to copy and paste things and borrow things and try to stay consistent with things and then learn to make them my own. So I think it's like an evolution. I don't think you should feel the pressure to feel like you should know everything, but certainly try to start with a baseline of what's important to you and how you're going to forecast, like building the future of your program within these meetings. Because I do think they're important, more so just from even languaging and using the words that you want to use in your own culture, and things you want to breed within your culture can happen in all of these types of meetings, and specifically as people adjourn for the summer.
Heather, you infiltrated the Bruin bubble. You somehow had lifted files. So it was.
Yeah, don't tell anybody that.
No, we'll edit that out. Samantha, we do a class for new collegiate coaches just to wrap this subtopic, but we had a call last week about this same topic. So for people who maybe aren't in that class but want to know more, reiterate the advice of that end of year meeting when you're a first year head coach.
Well, if you're a first-year head coach and you have made it, congratulations. I mean, there is nothing like crossing the finish line of your first year. I mean, I think it's like the first year of anything, first year of parenting, first year of, being a head coach. It's a lot. You probably feel like you've been drinking from a fire hydrant all year. And then what do you do at this point? I think a lot of listening would be a good idea. And not being too hard on your players or yourself, because I think it was, it's a hard year. And maybe it went really well. And if that's the case, I'm thrilled. I still think you want to listen as to why it went so well. I think having, good communication with your athletic administration, I think making sure that you feel like you have some confidence, even if you feel like you didn't quite know what you were doing at points, is really important. I think as you're getting feedback, absorbing it, not apologizing for it, not, being overly critical of yourself or your players, I think are all important, because I find those to be instincts of some first-year head coaches. And then at some point, you're going to have to kind of, synthesize all this information that you're getting, feedback from your individual players and from your athletic administration, and take a look at it and think, all right, what went well, what didn't go as well, what do I want to keep, what do I want to try again, because I still think it might stand a chance, maybe it didn't work quite the way I anticipated, what do I want to tweak and adjust, and then, what do I want to change, what did I try and it just flat out didn't work. That's the reflection of you and your coaching staff. I think with you and your players, I think it's still a lot about relationships. And I think the one theme that I hear from coaches who, from when they start out to when they're 5-year, 10-year or older, is how important the relationship piece is, and how they didn't realize it early on. They thought it was about strategy and X's and O's and your first and third plays and all the stuff that you all talk about at the convention, pitching and hitting, when really what's important. I mean, I think Mike White was the one that said that, Joanna, on our last Out of the Box, was relationships and getting to know your players and getting to know what works for them in terms of coaching and feedback and learning. And then them getting to know you so that they trust you. And so as you're trying to tell them things to do, on the field, that it's resonating in a different way. So, I hope, I hope that you have the time to have that kind of reflection before jumping into that transfer portal pool in your recruiting, because it's a fast pace.
For sure. Well, we spent a lot of time on the meetings. Let's spend some time on the survey piece. So, Samantha, I'm going to stick with you. What are things, if you are at an institution that uses an athletic department-wide survey, the conversations that you need to have with your administrator, what should those look like? When should you be asking? Do you need to know the questions? Do you need to know when it's sent? What should coaches want to know?
So I have some strong opinions about these surveys, and I think it's because I deal with a lot of coaches who are damaged and hurt by them. And so I understand, Jessica, from an administrator's point of view, and I'm not sure what you all do there, that having some kind of written memorialization or quantitative, feedback or analysis can be important, just as a tool of evaluating. I worry because I think that there are a lot of questions that are not well phrased, that are leading to produce negative answers that have a lot of gender bias in them. I had one just this week that talked about, do you believe that your coach would do anything for you, or something like that? And it was like, what are we asking about here? But given all of that, and given that they exist and that they are used in a lot of places, I think it is very important for coaches to understand what the questions are. Now might be a little late to dive into this at the end of April, with some of them probably already deployed, but still, late is better than never. Knowing what the questions are, having a conversation with your sports administrator about when they're going to be given, about how they're going to be given, because as Jessica was talking about trends, I've had teams that get together, in an apartment off campus, and they all put the same answer down together. And because there's this sense of loyalty, and they want a coaching change. And so they will make it sound a certain way. So I think that these surveys can be very powerful tools, but they can also be weapons. And so how do you disarm them from being weaponized is, having conversations and getting input about what the questions are, how the results are going to be used, when they're going to be deployed, are they anonymous, are they not, so that, the coach doesn't feel like they are, kind of held hostage by, the feedback, because that's not the goal. That really isn't the goal. That just is what can happen in situations where, there's some tension in the program. But I realize this is a hot topic, and I'm trying to walk on these hot coals very carefully. But I will tell you, the best group that I have seen do surveys remains Matthew Davidson with Excellence with Integrity. They have a methodology. They've been doing these surveys for decades. There is a science to it. It's not just a Survey Monkey with tell me about your softball experience. Was your coach abusive? You know, those kinds of questions. But really back to Heather's point, which is trying to measure how the team and the coach and the players, you know, fulfilled the values and the mission of the team, right? I mean, that's, I think, the ideal survey experience talks about, and really ask questions about that, not just, do you like your coach?
Thank you very much. We've had Matthew from Excellence with Integrity Institute at convention before. We have a video of his speech. I know he was working with Stanford at the time. I think he had Jessica Allister with him. So if you want more information on that group, it's ewii.org is their website. You can check that out. And then Samantha, just one more follow up, and then Jessica will come to you and to the coaches. But hit me with the good side. Like, when this is done well, what are the positives that can come out of it for coaches and administrators?
I think that when questions are well framed and there's thoughtful feedback given, then we do get this, you know, sense and maybe even some trends of things that are going well in the program and that areas that need some focus and support. I think that that's probably the ideal outcome, is that it is constructive feedback that, you know, then informs the next year, right? And what happens next, and it can be specific in terms of how practices are run or timing, or, you know, there can be small feedback that can make a big difference if it's addressed. I think, you know, as long as it's not personalized, I think if it is given in the spirit of, and the coaches have said this, making the program better, being part of something bigger, what can I share that will help the team? I think that those are probably the most successful and effective methods of feedback that I've seen.
Great. Thank you, Jessica. I'm sure you have seen several iterations and have gone through a lot of different ways that your program uses them. What are some of the best things you've seen come out of surveys, and what would you suggest coaches and administrators do collectively to make sure it's a positive experience?
Yeah, most definitely. I do think, as I mentioned before, it's all about the timing. We try to go to the team when it's still a very optimistic part of the season. We usually go with our athletic director and our sport program administrator for that team, along with our FAR. And we start off with congratulating, you know, the team on where they are in the season or how they've done academically. We keep it very positive. We've brought treats to them before, like a, you know, little bundt cakes or something like that, to just be celebratory in nature. Like, hey guys, we're here to celebrate you and all that you do to represent our university. We appreciate you. You know, and today is just an opportunity for you guys to give us anonymous feedback and share with us what's working and, you know, where we can get better so that we can improve this experience for you and for future generations, you know. And we tell them, you know, no incident is too small, and, you know, no feedback is off the table in terms of what we want to hear from you guys. And so, you know, we do, we leave them alone in the room with their cell phones where they can access the survey. We currently do it through Teamworks and Pulse. We've used other platforms in the past, but we can, you know, adjust the survey to our liking. We can change the questions we have when we've seen, you know, questions that seem to be leading and whatnot. We have a lot of open-ended questions. And essentially, you know, we're looking at different areas. Like, we want to evaluate all of our support service programs in addition to our coaching staff and our, you know, we want to know everything that's touching the team in any situation, any type of support area, so that we can see what's working and what's not. So, you know, we pretty much, we take academics as a segment, and we dive hard into that in terms of, you know, your class schedule is working, how, you know, what type of feedback can you give us on the frequency in which you meet with your academic counselors. And, you know, we start with that, and we start with the student focus in the survey. And then, you know, we move on to, you know, how were your travel accommodations, and, how was your experience in balancing, you know, your time as a student and as an athlete. And then we'll get into, you know, community involvement, and were you provided with opportunities in which you wanted to, you know, advance and grow civically. And then, you know, we'll go into, you know, tell us more about, you know, what's working within your team. Like, if you had to, you know, tell us, you know, what's the best thing that's, you know, if you wanted to describe your team to a future recruit in terms of what's the best aspect, what would that be? We'll get answers, across the board. It feels like family, our coach has our back, we feel supported, things like that. And so we're looking for those types of, themes, and then we don't ever Samantha may be able to go more into this, but we're very protective of this data. We don't reproduce it. We don't reproduce documents. We keep it in the system that it lives in, so that we don't create any records for public record requests. And so, we protect that for the coach's sake. And for the team. And so, as a sport program administrator, when I say I look for trends, I'm giving that feedback in a very summarized version in the head coach's evaluation. And so, it's like, one of the trends might be that our team feels that they didn't get enough. They're from a time management perspective, they didn't get enough notice on when practices schedulings were changed, and so they want more advanced notice. And so that might be a trend in an area where I advise the coaching staff, like, hey guys, what can we do better here? Like, tell me about when the team is being notified of the weekly schedule. Do you give the weekly schedule? Do you only give a daily schedule? How far in advance do the student athletes get it? How can we respect their time and make sure that they know what to expect and what's coming? And so those are the types of ways in which we use the survey to look for, areas in which our student athletes are identifying as like, hey, we could do this better. And so that's, again, we let the data live where it lives. We have those conversations with the coaches. We try to have them before they have their exit meetings, as I mentioned before, so that they have that window of time to know what the team has said, and then to try to maybe dig a little bit deeper in their individual meetings, so that they can figure out how we can make improvements in those areas. But it's really a collaborative effort, and in no way, shape, or form are we trying to use it to go out and get the head coach. We're really trying to make the program better.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you for that info. That's great. Shannon, how about your experience with surveys? Is something that you've seen, that you've benefited from, that you use now, a certain way you approach that?
I think most coaches naturally are suspicious of the end of the year surveys, of course, because we're always a little bit insecure about trying to get everything covered and doing everything, trying to be perfect. It's funny, Jessica talked about advanced warning for practice changes. And I mean, for like 4 straight years, that was the number one feedback that I would get personally from my administrator was, yeah, the girls don't like it when you just change practice 2 days before, or even if it's weather or whatever is happening. But I started off very suspicious about it and worrying about it. And now looking back, it's been very positive. Now we do things a month in advance with our schedule. We try to just to get out of ahead of certain things, like Jessica was talking about, those complaints, and trying to help our student athletes manage their time better. It's really helped me as a coach, because I'm just worried about practice and games, and sometimes I forget about their full days, and so that's helped me broaden the way I look at things, and my assistants really helped me with that. But yeah, for the most part, it's been very beneficial for me to see how I can improve. You find out something every year that you might be weak or strong at, because you also find out the things that the girls they're talking about that is very positive with your program. So yeah, I like getting feedback from them. You can't be too sensitive. One year we won a national championship when I was at Lubbock Christian, and I had a lot of complaints from girls that weren't getting to play, and I learned from that year. So you're always going to have some negatives that go with the positive, and if you're sensitive, then you better run away from them, because you're always going to have some things that you don't like.
Oh, for sure. Coach Tar, anything that you would add on the survey piece?
I welcome the feedback. I also, I don't know. I think it's just like today's times, like it's a have to do. And I mean, these surveys are like so annoying, I think, for the athletes to like do. And you know, half the time, I don't know, you just got to take it with a grain of salt, but certainly listen to what the feedback is and be open for it. And I think the better your relationship is with your administration, the more, you know, feedback is just whatever subtle nudges or things, but certainly, I don't know. I mean, sometimes these things that are bigger issues hopefully would come out before a survey, not in the survey. I just I don't know. It's like a check the box thing for my brain. I try not to take them too personally.
Appreciate that. Samantha, anything you have to put a bow on or think is important to talk about from the survey perspective?
You know, I think feedback is important, you know, and I think coaches are used to giving feedback, right? I mean, you coach every day, do this better, you know, bend lower, whatever your feedback is to your athletes. And so it is hard when it feels like it's coming back around, but it is how we grow and get better. My sensitivity with the surveys, again, is just the venting that takes place on them. And then it, you know, it's people's livelihoods and careers that hang in the balance. I also feel like it disproportionately hits coaches of women's sports in an athletic department, because I don't think that men's basketball players are asking, you know, talking about how much their coach believes in them, or if they feel like there's camaraderie on the team, right? So to me, as in, you know, for administrators, I just really press to have consistent standards. And now sometimes, you know, I'll hear from an administrator or from a general counsel that, well, we didn't get the negative complaints on the men's side, so that's not why we're not investigating or why we're not looking into it. So, well, they probably didn't take it, right? What's your participation rate on the men's side compared to the women's? Sometimes, for whatever reasons, you know, our women's student athletes, you know, often sit down and they, you know, they engage, which again, I don't want our coaches to be afraid of feedback. I think it's important. It's just how it's structured and then how it's used, you know, to make a coach better, to make a team better. I think that's, I think we need to use the surveys responsibly.
Thank you. Anybody else, anything to add on surveys before we move on? Excellent. The next couple of questions I have are on, you're gonna love these guys, are on the really hard conversations that you have to have, and how do you do that? But like I said, this is where we let Samantha start with all of them. Samantha, the first one we have is, how do you discuss concerns about nutrition, eating, and meal habits with student athletes? You want to go ahead and take that one?
Very carefully. Right? And probably not you as the coach. I would really encourage you to bring in your strength and conditioning coach, your athletic trainer. I think right now there is very heightened sensitivity when coaches speak about nutrition and body strength and, you know, mobility and speed and all the things that are very important to performance. So I understand how challenging it is for a coach to feel like there are variables that a student athlete, you know, should be able to control to an extent, you know, and although, you know, nutrition can be hard and disordered eating, you know, is something that needs medical attention. My concern when a coach talks about any of this is that it is heard differently than how it is intended. So as you are trying to encourage your student athlete to be fit or stronger, or to use the nutritional, you know, resources in the department, what can be heard is, I'm, you know, body shaming, and that's the complaint that gets, you know, that gets lodged. So, you know, my recommendation is no, I would not have a head coach or an assistant coach talk about nutrition. I think that's something that needs to be handled by the medical staff, and maybe in some schools you do have, you know, a nutritionist or a dietitian on your staff.
Thank you. Anybody, anything to add on that topic?
Yeah, we have a nutritionist, and our strength conditioning coach takes care of all of that. And so I think that's great advice. You know, we don't bring it up. They know that they're going to go 5 days a week to strength conditioning, and they're going to meet ever so often as a team with our nutritionist. And if they request individual counseling with our nutritionist, then obviously we make that available.
Excellent. Anything else? All right, Samantha, the next one is, how would you talk to a student athlete who has been consistently injured and possibly they should consider not playing because of their health and long-term well-being?
Also very carefully. And, what the risk here is, you cannot, as a coach, veer very far into the medical lane. And if there is a student athlete who is injured and who has not been cleared, it cannot ever come across or be expressed that that you think that they should end their career, because it can be seen as an adverse action against a student athlete because of a medical condition, and that puts you in a high risk category for exposure. There are federal laws that prohibit that. So, obviously, a lot of, most of you care about your athletes. I'd like to say all of you care about your athletes and their health and their well-being. And certainly there are kids who just, get to college. My oldest was not injured at all, and then had a torn ACL and a torn meniscus and a torn labrum. And it's like, what in the world happened? And she ended her career. So I get this. I just, as a coach in these meetings, I think you need to rely on your medical staff to lead that as to what, in terms of their clearance or the viability of their career. What your athlete needs to hear is that you care and that you support them. And I think those are the themes. But I do understand that there are some athletes who you get to this point and it doesn't seem to make a lot of sense that they continue.
Thank you, Samantha. We'll let you get your motion activated light back on there. Anything to add on that injury piece? Any advice for coaches on that one from anyone else? Jessica, do you have something?
Yeah, I mean, I always advise our coaches, you cannot direct medical care, and no matter, I know you care passionately, and I know you think the best thing that the athlete needs to do next, but you can have that conversation directly with your athletic trainer, and then you can let them drive that conversation. And also, I think once the athletic trainers have said, where the athlete stands, or they've brought in the team physicians and they've had these conversations, I think coaches, you can lean on your administrators as well. I know that myself, as the sport administrator, I've had many conversations, with student athletes just to explain their options, and I think it's really important that they feel safe, speaking to an administrator about, what they can do. And, they need to understand that, they can continue to go to school, they can continue to be on scholarship, they have that option. And they may not be able to ever play at this school again if they choose this option, but that doesn't mean that they can't play at another school if they miraculously are healed and they have, they are able to come back from that injury. And so, we walk through all aspects of what their course may look like, and just make sure that they fully understand, every option that's available to them. So as a coach, you don't need to handle this. You have people that can handle this for you.
Thank you very much. I have a few questions left. So if you have one, please get that in the Q&A box to ensure that we get to it. The topic on the transfer portal and things, we've talked about that in terms of student athletes coming to you and at their direction. But I've heard from coaches that have brought it up with their student athletes of, hey, if you want a more prominent role, or if if you're looking for a different experience, you may want to consider, different options. Is that something, Samantha, that a coach can bring up in these meetings, or should be thinking about not only that conversation, but also in light of the House settlement and all of the unknowns?
Tell me again, I missed the first part, Joanna.
Just the idea of a coach bringing up the transfer portal to a student athlete. Yeah, we've covered it with student athletes bringing it up, but what about the coach directive?
That's what I thought. I just wanted to make sure. So I've heard different versions of this from coaches. I have, the most creative and maybe bold one was a coach it was not a softball coach inviting players to join, to enter the transfer portal and making it sound, like it was a good thing, almost like a party to go to. But I think it's been a tough topic. Sometimes it's not, and it seems to make a lot of sense. I think, to Jessica's point, and with administrative guidance and support, if there's a student athlete on your roster who you don't think that this is a good match, and that and they are not playing, or not, they don't have the role, I think finding a way to talk about that so that they understand that there are other options, and that they, that they can stay here, but this is what it looks like, and another option would be to consider what other opportunities might be there and what your role in supporting them in the transfer portal would be. I think it's very individualized. I don't know if the coaches on the call on the Zoom tonight have had those conversations. So I don't think I can give an absolute, like, don't do this, like the medical directive, but I think it's delicate. I think where it could go wrong is if, is again, how the student athlete hears the message, like, my coach doesn't want me anymore, they're cutting me or sending me to the transfer portal, and how that could, come back. But again, on the men's side, I think sometimes that is happening, and we're trying to be really sensitive on the women's side. So I'm eager to hear, the different perspectives on this topic on this Zoom.
Yeah. Shannon, Heather, anything on this one, or conversations you've had, or thoughts? Shannon, you're off mute. You go first.
Okay. Well, it is delicate, and every situation is different from year to year. I've already had two young ladies speak with me in the past several weeks about me helping them go to another place if they decide to go in the portal, somewhere where they can play every day, good players, but playing behind other good players, and they want to play. They enjoy the program, but they're wanting to play. And I always say, well, I transferred and it helped me play, become a starter. So, going back to relationships, like you guys were talking about, trying to have a personal relationship with each one of them, and let them know that you care and you love them individually for who they are, and you're going to try to help them. I've never cut anyone personally that I recruited myself. But I've had, of course, like all of us, I've had girls that have wanted to leave and go play somewhere else. And so, but man, it's tough because everyone's different. And lots of times, the bad that gets involved, and I say bad, what muddles things are the parents. Their parents see them as being stars, and they don't see them every day and through the process of what we do every day. And they have their own plans for their kids. And so, you have that variable as well. But, I wish I was an expert on it, because especially in this day and age, because it changes every year, the variables that we have to deal with. We don't have a consistent baseline yet of how we handle things, and how the system is. So, but yeah, I mean, being open and honest with them, communicating with them, every exit interview that we have, we take notes, and then we send them a recap of the meeting, and if they want to discuss it further, we do that. But it's this day and age, hopefully we'll get some type of consistency with how we get to deal with things.
Thank you, Coach. Heather, anything to add on that?
I mean, in a perfect world, you maybe already have like a forecast, and like Coach Hayes is saying, like, have already had some of those conversations with, gals that might not be happy with their role, and forecasting out that their role isn't going to change much. And I think that's the manner in which things have to operate, because equally so, I mean, if they're not happy and they love their role, that hopefully all those things can be transparent, but they're not ever usually. So I guess my experience in a lot of this has just been, if somebody, you think that they're not going to have a great role and the role's not going to change. I mean, this is before the transfer portal really times, but we've had conversations with young ladies that haven't maybe been happy with their role. And it usually always happened like April 4th to 15th. I don't know why that is. And you can talk through that. And there's been some times, even in the I guess 10 years ago, players just leave the program at that point, and that always sucks and is icky. But I think there's like a weird point at which role formation really sets in at that point, and people just become, either not contributing members to the culture positively, and you can maybe even have those type of conversations. But I think anymore, you just hopefully want to just get ahead of any of them, whether it favors you or favors them or doesn't favor you or doesn't favor them. I just think people need to know their role, and you deserve, as I guess the coach, to, express what those roles are. I don't know the best way possible legally what that is, but I just think full transparency is good because nobody wants to be stuck in a situation where they're not thriving.
Excellent. Jessica, anything you would add from an administrator standpoint of those conversations and helping the student athlete, but being aware of the line?
Yeah, I think the only thing I would really add is that I try to make sure that my coaches remember with these difficult conversations to protect themselves by not just having this conversation alone with just themselves and the student athletes. So I always encourage our coach to at least include, another coach or a staff member, director of ops, whatever that person, a trusted person on their staff, in order to also witness the conversation. I've seen some of these conversations go awry, and then, the student athlete heard one thing and the coach says they said another thing. And so I think it's important to just to cover yourself and make sure you're not, having that difficult situation alone. And then again, pointing them back to, the proper administrator to, again, help them, navigate that process, particularly in this situation. I think your compliance director will be able to, really present, all options of what it means to enter the portal and what that can look like, and really spell that out to the student athlete so that they can eventually see that maybe this is going to be a better outcome for them.
Thank you.
Joanne, I think
Yeah.
the last thing I just want to add to this conversation is I think the hard conversations come because people aren't happy. So why are they not happy, right? And to Heather's point, they've gotten to this point and they just don't, it's not the experience they expected. I think it's important for the coach, to take a step back and realize for most of these kids, you pick them, right? For, that you recruited them, you saw something in them, they came in, this is a journey. And you're at this point in the year where people are tired. If you're not tired, I'm not sure why you're not tired, because you have been traveling and coaching and practicing and scouting and doing all these things and dealing with weather. And so, as you're making these decisions and having these conversations when you're tired and things aren't going quite the way you want, and maybe the athletes disappointed you. Maybe they've not turned out the way that you thought they would. Maybe they're not working hard. Maybe they don't have the attitude. Why? They're tired too. Like they think about what it would be like to travel and go to all the practices and do all the things and not coach and just stand there and cheer, and how hard that is. And I think that coaches often have this natural reactive, like, well, they should be happy. They should be a team player. They should have a better attitude. And you know what? Yeah, they should, but they're human too. And I feel like it just reaches this boiling point. And so these kids aren't happy because of all that. And they're calling their parents and their parents aren't happy. And then you get to this hard conversation. So how you handle it and how you diffuse it as a coach and how you take a step back and see, what was the good of this year and where does this kid fit in? And how can we take a look at this out of the pace of the season? Is there a chance for her to develop in this program? What does that look like? Or is it a good time to consider a change because, to Shannon's point, they want to play and they're probably not going to play here. And maybe we didn't know that 2 years ago, but we know that now. So how can you be a source of support, and what does that look like? So we're trying to avoid the boiling point, and then heading into hard conversations. And to Jessica's point, absolutely never by yourself, always with somebody else there.
And can I say that it's only going to get worse with 25, programs going to 25 full scholarships. You're bringing, we all try to forecast our rosters, and you give, your pitchers, or, how we've done in the past, your key players get the most money from the scholarships that we're cutting up to 12. And now going to 25 fulls, I mean, I tell you what, managing our rosters is going to become very difficult because, having role players is not what you're trying to recruit often with full scholarship. And so those kids are coming in all expecting to play. And so trying to handle these end of the year conversations and getting out ahead of them, kind of what Heather was talking about, is only going to become increasingly more difficult, especially if this house settlement passes. So, it's it's going to become an art form on how to handle our rosters, and I'm crossing my fingers. And I wish I could give better advice, is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, definitely difficult, and a lot to wait for and learn. One thing we haven't talked about, Heather, you touched on it a little, so I'll start with you. But the end of the season for the coach, we're spending a lot of this time student athlete in the meetings and the evaluations and but what about coaches? What do they need to do? You talked a little bit about reflecting and your assistant coaches. What's on your to-do list when this is done? Kids have left campus. What comes next? And you can't say recruiting.
Oh man. I guess cross your fingers and hopefully nobody goes into the portal June 30th or whenever the date is, I guess. Yeah, it's a crazy time. If you make it to regionals and dip out early, or you don't go to regionals, or you don't go to your conference tournament. I mean, there's actually so much time that you can't really do anything with your athletes. I know what happened to us last year is we ended regionals, came home, and we had our only exit meeting with our team that we could possibly have a couple days after we got back. And then you couldn't even really talk to your team. So I think the more you can do now, I guess, before the quote unquote end of your season, to lay out how it's going to work and ifs, ands, or buts. I mean, we never like to talk about it because we kind of taboo it. We're like, okay, see or bust, no conversation about anything until we're done. But I think anymore, the better you can just script out, whether it be people are taking vacations for, personal reasons, or family, or even with your staff. I mean, it can get messy if you don't really have a plan. I guess what I'm trying to say is try to have the best plan that you possibly can, and not worry about the taboo piece of you don't want to, talk about the end of the season until the end of the season, because there really has to be a plan, or you are literally just going to have to be recruiting and figuring it out as you go along.
Thank you. Shannon, anything for you of the what you should be doing?
Well, you can't say, Joanna, you can't take away the recruiting piece, because with this portal deal, the last 3 years, I'm sure Heather can relate to this. You find out kids of your own that aren't coming back, and then the portal hits right in the middle of regionals, and you start figuring out kids that are hitting the portal or start contacting you. And if you don't start recruiting immediately, you're not going to get those kids to fill the pieces that you think you might need to round out your team. So it's been crazy. I mean, I've been exhausted the past couple of years trying to, we got beat out at regionals, and then, you want to take a few days to rest and recover at least. And we haven't been able to do that. You're immediately on the phone all day long, and fielding calls, and trying to, find some good fits off the portal. And that's what everyone's doing. So right now we're just trying to prepare for that, believe it or not, the recruiting piece of it. The what ifs, if we get beat out in a regional, or if we don't make a regional, trying to set our schedule for what we're going to do, and how we're going to handle our exit meetings, and how we're going to handle our recruiting. And I think what Heather said is great advice. I mean, you just have to go for it, because it's new, uncharted waters with a lot of these new rules, and try to figure it out and get ahead of it as you go along.
For sure. And Coach, I hear you. I was looking for more the unobvious answer, but you're right. It hits you in the face, and you have to deal with it. And if you don't, you're going to be dealing with it later. For you, Jessica, what do you encourage your head coaches to do when it comes to evaluating assistant coaches? Do you have a formal structure in place? How do you approach that at the end of the year?
Yeah, I think, it's all about showing everyone at this point that you value them, and so I think, just like you have to re-recruit your players, I think you have to, re-recruit your coaches, and you have to pour back into them and make sure that they're on the same page as you and that they're invested and that you guys are seeing eye to eye and, and if not, and you need to, look at, fixing that puzzle first, then I think that's where your focus has to be is, do you have the right people on your team? And so I think that's, first and foremost, because before you can go in and start meeting with your players, your coaching staff has to all be on the same page. But yeah, I think, you as the head coach, you're going to have to, dig a little bit deeper and grind it out and, really pour back in, to those assistant coaches, as much as you can right now and, make sure that they know that you believe in them and then, finish the season strong and then talk about, same conversations you have in those exit meetings with your student athletes, like what worked for you, what didn't, where, do you see us, what do you see our future looking like, et cetera. But I do think it's important, again, just to be open to all of that feedback that's been collected. Again, a lot comes from those exit surveys in terms of, I really, the players will say, I really value the way this assistant coach, talk to us in these situations of adversity, or, this coach tended to yell a bit too much and, we didn't always see the positive side from them. And so I think there's a lot of teachable moments that are going to arise if you really dig into that feedback. And hopefully you could ask those, same questions in your exit meetings with your student athletes and gain more insight, again, to what you saw from the survey so that you can have those conversations with your coaching staff. But yeah, I think you have to have the right people on the bus in the right seats in order to lead your team. And I think that has to be your priority.
For sure. Heather, how do you approach that assistant coach piece, that evaluation or reflection time?
Well, like I said, I want to do a better job of just getting like good, raw, direct feedback from the student athletes that the assistant coaches work under or, build skills with, so that feedback can just be good and constructive. And then also too, I think we try to do a good job meeting head coach to assistant coach. We have this 30, 60, 90 formal review process that our HR department recommends. And so some of the questions, whether it be 30 days into your work experience, 60 days or 90 days, kind of apply, I guess, throughout the entirety of a softball season, like September to June. So it kind of fits well, but kind of keeping that as an ongoing feedback loop between yourself and the assistant coaches is always good. Probably never done enough of, because, it's probably like parents in a relationship. It's like the last people you worry about, but it's the most important thing to worry about is that kind of formation of that relationship. So again, just doing a good job of keeping those meetings ongoing so that, the things when they come up aren't like really awkward or icky at the end of the year. Believe me, I've had enough of those conversations and I'm by no means perfect at any of them, but just trying to stay steadfast in that ongoing communication.
Thank you, Coach. Shannon, maybe a little new for you this year. You have your son as an assistant coach. It's got to be a little bit hard in an evaluation process. He's a very good coach, but you have some of those strange things. Do you do anything different with that? We've got a lot of families that coach together. How do you approach that?
I still use corporal punishment on my son, even though he's 28 years old. Actually, it's probably the other way around. He's since he's young, he answers straight to my sports supervisor, so that's good since he's my son. But I'm it's new for me for sure, and so far it's been really good. If you start losing a lot of games, I'm sure that can change. But no, he knows what I want. He's my oldest son. I think he's a pretty mature guy. He's more mature than his old man for sure. But it's been really good so far, knock on wood. But again, he answers, from a bureaucratic standpoint, he answers to my supervisor, so that's good as well. And she does his evaluations. So so far so good, I guess I'll say.
It's good info. All right, we're gonna go one more time around the horn for everybody. This is generally a question that people kind of dismiss, but it's the how do you take care of yourself piece. Most people will say, oh, I'm not very good at it and all the things, but you got to give us something here. It's a long year. You're tired, mentally, physically, spiritually, all the ollies. How do you take the time to get yourself in a great place? Jessica, let's start with you. How do you help your coaches understand that this is important?
Well, fortunately, our head coach she's just amazing at self-care, and she's actually come in and been a breath of fresh air to all of us because she preaches gratitude and just a shift in mindset about being grateful each day. And she attends daily mass, and I think that she proves that she prioritizes her values. She lives it out on a daily basis, and then that just carries on from the top down. Her staff knows that they can do the same, and so she starts off the year with a spa day for her staff. We do have an all-female staff, but they all went and did manis and pedis, before this season got started. And, just she's always looking for, innovative ways to make sure that everyone is taking the time to take care of themselves and that she models that behavior. So I think that's, that would be my advice, is that as a head coach, you model that you want to, prioritize your values, and then everyone else will do the same.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Let's see. Heather, how about you? Thoughts on how you can take care of yourself?
Well, thanks for that feedback, Jessica. Probably need to listen to that at on my own self. But I think just in general, we have one of our coaches has a young son, and so it really keeps me honest at a lot of times of like what's really important. Not having children of my own, I can really just go crazy and send notes and this and that post 9 o'clock at night. So I think I've done a better job over the last year specifically of just being mindful of like when we're working, we don't always have to be on our phones and slaves to our phones. So I think that's one thing just to keep in mind for my own self. But then I think doing a good job of like permitting yourself and your staff to take like set vacations and scale out like who's doing what when, because being on call in this space is very addicting, and you can just crush the world, but then you crush yourself and your staff, and it's not healthy. So just looking out and forecasting and saying, hey, I'm going to be out for 6 days here and da 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 da. Now I haven't really afforded myself that because my out time has for the last 5 or 6, 8 years, shoot, I don't even know what it's been, 8 years, that sucks, I don't even really remember, it's been 8 years, has been my off time as USA softball. So I'm looking forward to personally being able to actually like say I'm not going to China for my time off to go coach. I'm maybe going to go somewhere else. So yeah, I don't have the perfect model for that because I'm not the perfect model for that.
Well, good for you for going somewhere else. And I hear you. No one is the perfect model. We're all learning and growing in that space for sure. Samantha, wrap this thing up. What did we miss? What did coaches need to know? What advice would you give them? You're talking to so many coaches right now. What do you have for us?
I think you need to take a break. I mean, I'll just flat out say it. I think you need to take a break. I think it's unrealistic to do your best work when you are tired and have, kind of pushed through a whole year. And I understand that the transfer portal is going to open and you're going to dive in. So I like the idea of Heather's really scheduling it. I think good habits, you all talk to your athletes about good habits. I have my own teenagers telling me that I need to put down my phone, right? And so I think the phone is a big piece. It's our connection to all of the badness, the texts and the updates and the Twitter posts and all of it. And I think, if in order to recharge, you do need to unplug. And I think just remembering, that perspective and having a little time and space from the game and having some time off and having some personal time, I think is going to reignite your love. If you're feeling, burnout or tired, that's going to be where you're going to remember what you love about your profession. And I still do think that even with the pace and the demands and the house settlement and all of it, you have the best job in the whole world. And, being a coach and the impact that you can have, sometimes it is just hard to feel that this time of year, although some of you might be feeling it, in spades if your team is doing well and you're rolling and it's an exciting time. So, we cheer you on. I also think that that is a neat part about the sport and about cheering on those teams that are doing well. So if you are one that's, knocked out or don't have postseason play, taking a look at your colleagues and how they're doing and what they're doing for the sport is a different perspective, right? And I think that that can be healthy. But we are here for you, the NFCA. So however we can support you, through these, educational moments, or find my calendar if you want to set up a time to talk. I'd be glad to listen and talk you through whatever is in your world right now. But thank you for joining us in this busy time of year, or maybe you're listening to it, on a bus or on a plane somewhere, and that's great.
Samantha, we forgot your favorite thing, so I'm going to give them 2 more minutes of extra and contract negotiations. They're coaches that just crushed life and they get to do some really great things. Give us that info. And if you're looking for it, Samantha's calendar contact information is in your coach's box. So log in, you can get to it there. But we had to finish on the really positive.
Yes. Contracts is my favorite because it is a fun topic. It's exciting. It means that you have a job offer or your school wants to renew you. And it is a moment to improve your situation financially, or the support that surrounds your program. And now usually is a time. So if you are winning, or you win big, you win your conference tournament, you have a kind of a knockout season, especially, it is a good time for you to check in with your sport administrator and see if we can improve your salary or your incentives or your benefit or your time, kind of depending on what your priority is. So this is one of those moments. I talk about 3 moments of leverage where, you might be able to have some bargaining power in this. And if you are winning big or your contract is up, now is a great time for us to have a chat about your situation. But it can be exciting time, or a job offer. And that is a huge moment of leverage. If a school comes looking for you and wants you to be their coach, that is the time to ask, for and advocate for yourself. And that can be hard, but I will pump you up. I give a great, pre-game, pre-negotiation pump up talk. So get on my calendar.
Awesome. Well, thank you all very much. You will find this in the coach's box under webinars in a day or so. We appreciate it. Share it with anyone who is a member. It is behind the paywall, so they're going to need to be a member to access, but it is worth the watch. I think you all were wonderful panelists. Thank you for taking the time. I know it is your most precious commodity, so thank you for giving us some moments of your evening when you didn't have to. Anyone else, if you feel like you have a question that we didn't quite get to, let us know. education@nfca.org. Until next time, we thank you for joining us, and we hope you have a healthy and fantastic end to your 2025 season. Thanks, everybody.